I sat at my new desk in a different office, sipping terrible coffee, when my phone buzzed with a message from an old coworker. "You need to see this." Turn the sound up. The video opened on our old company's boardroom, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows. There sat Otto at the end of the long table, sweating through his shirt while the CFO calmly asked, "At what point did you become aware of the $1 million discrepancy, Mr. Thornton?" He stammered, reached for a water bottle with shaking hands, and my ex-team lead panned the camera just enough so I could see HR and legal sitting stone-faced beside him. My heart started pounding, not from fear this time, but something darker and sharper. Relief. Vindication. 7 weeks ago, I was the one sitting alone with his discrepancy, working late nights to fix a mess I never created. Now he was the one under the spotlight, squirming. I paused the video on his terrified face and whispered to myself. This was the part where everything finally made sense. This was justice. I rewound in my head to the day it all started. It was late afternoon in operations, that dead hour where fluorescent lights felt extra harsh and everyone moved slowly. I was closing out quarterly reports, my usual routine, when Otto strode over with purpose, dropping a thick folder on my keyboard so hard my spreadsheet disappeared from the screen. "Need you to clean this up," he said, like he was tossing a tissue into a bin, not detonating a bomb on my desk. Inside were mismatched numbers, vendor invoices with strange amounts, and a flagged note from finance written in angry red ink. Preliminary discrepancy estimate, $1,000. My stomach turned over hard. "Is this a joke?" I asked, flipping through pages that made absolutely no sense. He shrugged like it was nothing at all. "You're the detail person. Just fix it before the auditors see anything." No apology, no context, no explanation of how this even happened. Just that familiar expectation that I would quietly rescue him like I always did. I said nothing out loud, but in my head, I heard it clearly. If I did not fix this, someone was going down. That night I was the last one in the office, as usual. My screen glowed against the dark windows as I dug through files that refused to line up properly. Payments logged twice in the system. Invoices missing required approvals. Vendors I had never heard of before in my 3 years there. My eyes burned from staring at numbers, my shoulders ached from tension, but the fear kept me awake and typing. If this blew up publicly, they would look at the last person who touched the data. Me. I kept thinking about my rent due next week, my health insurance that I desperately needed, the way my mom always said, "Just keep your head down at work and you'll be fine." I tried to believe this was just a messy oversight, a glitch in the system, something I could unpick by sheer willpower and late nights. But as the numbers kept breaking apart in my hands like wet paper, a pit opened deep in my stomach. This was not a simple typo-level mistake. This was career-ending for someone. I just did not know yet if that someone would be me or him. Over the next few days, operations turned into my personal war zone. I sent Otto carefully worded questions by email, professional and polite. "Can you confirm who approved these vendor rate changes? Do you remember why this contract was backdated to last quarter?" He replied with frustratingly vague answers, if he bothered to reply at all. In person, he waved me off like I was bothering him with trivial details. "You're overthinking this. Just reconcile it and move on." But the more I traced the audit trail through the system, the more I saw only one consistent name on questionable approvals. His name, Otto Thornton. The authorization codes, the final sign-offs, the last-minute changes that made no logical sense. It was all him, every single time. At first I thought I was misreading it, seeing patterns where there were none. Then I realized with growing horror that I was not wrong. I sat at my desk with my hands hovering over the keyboard, my heart racing fast. It was not my mess to fix, it was his mess to own. And he clearly expected me to take the fall if it exploded. I finally asked for a proper meeting to discuss it. We sat in a small glass room that smelled like dry erase autoers and stale air from the vents. I showed him a printout of the approvals, his name circled in yellow highlighter on every single page. "These are yours," I said quietly, trying hard to keep my voice steady and professional. "The discrepancy traces back to decisions you personally signed off on. We need a solid plan before finance escalates this further up the chain." He did not even look at the paper for more than 2 seconds. "You're making this bigger than it is," he said, leaning back in his chair like I was boring him with pointless drama. "You're paid to solve problems, not dramatize them." My face burned with embarrassment and rising anger. "If this goes to the auditors, they will see your name everywhere," I pressed. His eyes flickered for just a second, then hardened into something cold and dismissive. "Then make sure it doesn't get to the auditors." In that moment, something small but important broke inside me. He was not scared of the consequences at all. He was arrogant enough to think I would protect him the way I always had before. That Friday, I was halfway through a pounding headache and a lukewarm coffee when I heard laughter coming from the main conference room. Actual laughter, bright and loud and cheerful. I glanced up from my screen and saw a woman in a sharp blazer shaking hands with Otto. The entire team was gathered around her, smiling like she was already part of the family. I wandered closer with the file still clutched in my hands, curious. Through the glass walls, I watched as he clapped her on the shoulder with fake warmth. "Everyone, this is our new senior operations lead," he announced with obvious pride in his voice. "My title, my role, my work for 3 years." He caught my eye through the glass and barely flinched at my shocked expression. "You'll meet her in a bit," he said casually to the room. When the crowd dispersed and people went back to their desks, he finally bothered to speak to me directly. "You'll help get her up to speed," he said, like he was assigning me to set up a printer or order office supplies. My fingers dug into the folder so hard the edges bent. He was actively replacing me while I was still working nights to save his career from total destruction. He called me into the conference room an hour later, with the new hire already seated at the table, notebook open and pen ready. Her name was Willow. She seemed nice enough. "You're a subject matter expert," he said cheerfully, gesturing between us like we were old friends meeting for coffee. "And Willow's coming in to help scale operations for growth. You'll show her the ropes and get her oriented." I was still processing the words, "help scale," when he added right in front of her, "Honestly, you've looked a bit overwhelmed lately with everything on your plate. This will free you up to focus on other priorities." The implication hit me like a punch directly to the chest. Overwhelmed, not capable enough, not sufficient for the job anymore. Willow smiled politely at me, completely unaware she was being used as a weapon in his game. I could not even blame her for being there and taking the opportunity. I forced a nod, feeling my throat close up tight with humiliation. "Sure," I managed to say. "Happy to help however I can." Inside, another thought surfaced clearly and coldly. "You hired my replacement in the middle of your own disaster. You really think I'm going to save you now?" That evening I stayed late again, but not to fix anything for him this time. I sat at my desk and stared at my screen, feeling the anger settle deep into something sharper and colder than before. The office was quiet, except for the constant hum of the air conditioning and the soft click of my mouse as I flipped between job boards and the spreadsheet from hell. My email pinged with a new message. It was Otto, of course. "Need the discrepancy fully wrapped up before next Friday. Want to show the board we're ahead of it and have things under control." There was no please in the message, no acknowledgement of the nights I had already given up for him, sacrificing my own time and health. My hands trembled as I typed a bland, "working on it" reply. Then I stopped and deleted the entire thing before hitting send. Instead, I wrote something very different. "Per your instructions, I will prepare all relevant files and will walk Willow through the current state next week during transition." I copied myself on my personal email address. For the first time in my entire career, I was not smoothing over his mess. I was documenting every single piece of it carefully. On Saturday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, a candle burning beside me, and a tight knot in my stomach. I updated my resume, something I had actively avoided for months because it felt like admitting defeat. But now it felt like pure survival instinct kicking in. I sent quick applications to 3 roles that looked like they were written specifically for someone with my exact skills. On Monday morning, a recruiter responded within hours, her tone enthusiastic and warm. By Wednesday afternoon, I was interviewing with a company across town that seemed genuinely shocked by the scope of what I handled completely alone. When I mentioned the $1 million discrepancy in careful, anonymized terms, they went completely silent for a moment. Then one of them said something that hit me incredibly hard. "You're severely underpaid for that level of responsibility." That word lodged itself in my chest like a splinter I could not remove. Underpaid, underappreciated, underestimated. That night, I looked at the spreadsheets again with fresh eyes and thought clearly for the first time. I had been giving complete loyalty to someone who would happily walk me into a firing line to save himself without a second thought. Back at work, my cursor blinked over broken formulas and missing entries that refused to make sense no matter how I arranged them. I realized that if I really dug in deep and worked harder, I could probably patch this mess well enough to keep auditors off the scent for another quarter or two. I could save his job with my technical skills. But I could also tie myself permanently to a fraudulent disaster I did not create and had absolutely no control over. My chest tightened with the weight of that choice pressing down. I pictured Otto bragging about fixing the quarter while quietly rewriting history in his favor, telling people I just couldn't keep up with the pressure. Then I pictured the alternative that scared me more at first. I stop working on it completely. I leave the discrepancy exactly where it sits right now. I let the system built specifically to catch errors do exactly what it was designed to do, catch him. My upbringing screamed at me to do the right thing, to keep things tidy and professional and smooth. But I was starting to realize something incredibly important. Protecting someone who would sacrifice me without hesitation was not moral or good. It was self-destruction. The final push came during a Wednesday morning status meeting with the full team present in the room. In front of everyone, Otto looked directly at me and asked in a loud, clear voice, "Are we done with that issue yet?" I started to explain carefully that I was compiling the outstanding items when he cut me off sharply. "We don't need excuses here," he said, his tone cold and dismissive. "We need results. Maybe this is exactly why we needed to bring in extra help on the team." The room went completely quiet and awkward. I felt every single eye on me, judging and wondering what I had done wrong. Heat rushed up my neck and into my face, but I swallowed it down hard. "Understood," I said, my voice low and controlled despite my rage. I watched Willow stare down at her notepad intensely, clearly uncomfortable with what she had just witnessed happening to me. As I walked back to my desk alone, isolated, I knew something with total clarity and zero doubt left. I would not drag myself over broken glass to protect a man who had no problem publicly kicking me down in front of everyone. That decision felt like freedom finally arriving. 2 days later, the recruiter called while I was on my lunch break in the parking lot, sitting alone in my car. "We'd like to move forward with an offer," she said, genuine excitement clear in her voice. The offer was significantly better pay, better benefits, and most importantly, a manager who sounded genuinely impressed by my skills instead of constantly threatened by me. I listened carefully, feeling something like oxygen return to my lungs after drowning for months. "I accept," I said without any hesitation, and when I hung up, I sat in my car and cried. Not from sadness, but from pure release of pressure. I sent my resignation email after work that same day, simple and polite, giving the standard 2 weeks notice required. I did not mention the discrepancy anywhere in my letter. I did not mention the replacement hire situation. I just quietly chose myself for the first time in years. When Otto replied hours later with a one-line message that said, "Only let's discuss transition plans," it was all the confirmation I needed. He had genuinely assumed I would never leave him, that I had no options or value elsewhere. He was completely wrong. In my final 2 weeks at the company, I touched the discrepancy files only to organize them neatly for whoever came next. I gathered every spreadsheet, every email thread, every system log into one clean folder named Outstanding Issues per Otto Thornton instructions. I printed a detailed summary of exactly where I had stopped my work. Missing approvals that were never secured, unexplained rate changes that made no business sense, unbalanced accounts with absolutely no backup documentation. I did not adjust a single formula to make things look better than they were. I did not fix one broken link in the chain. I left detailed comments in the margins of every single document, pending clarification from MT. I wrote clearly. Awaiting approval from MT. Change requested by MT on 3/15 without proper authorization. If anyone looked closely at the pattern, it would be completely undeniable. On my last night in that office, I placed the folder carefully on my old desk with a bright yellow sticky note on top. For Willow, current state as of my departure, per Otto's direct request. It was not sabotage in any way. It was just honest documentation. For once, I was not cushioning the truth to protect him from his own actions and choices. On my final day, HR made me sit through a bland exit interview in a small windowless room. Reason for leaving? The woman asked in a bored tone, barely looking up from her computer screen. Career growth opportunities, I said calmly, because the real answer would not fit anywhere on her standard form. The real answer was that I was completely exhausted from cleaning up my boss's unethical disasters while he publicly humiliated me in meetings. I handed in my security badge, cleared out my drawer of personal items, and lingered for just a second by my old chair. Otto appeared at my desk at the very last minute, all false charm and smooth words. "Big move," he said casually, as if we were friends. "No hard feelings, right? We'll be fine here without you." There was that familiar smugness again, the unshakable belief that he was completely bulletproof. I smiled at him, calm and steady. "I'm sure you'll manage just fine," I replied evenly. As I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close on that chapter, I felt equal parts terror and freedom washing over me in waves. I did not know exactly what would happen next. I just knew I was finally not standing between him and his own consequences anymore. The following Monday at my new job, I spent the morning learning systems that actually made logical sense and were well organized. Around noon, my old coworker Nova sent me a text message out of nowhere. "Did you know finance can't make the quarter close?" My heart skipped a beat hard. "The discrepancy?" I typed back quickly. "Yep," she replied immediately. "Willow's freaking out completely. She's in Otto's office every single hour. She keeps saying the numbers don't add up at all, and there's no support documentation for any of the changes he made." I stared at my phone screen, imagining that folder sitting on my old desk, all the highlighted gaps staring back at whoever opened it. I should have felt guilty about leaving it exactly that way. Instead, I felt oddly calm and clear-headed. The system was simply seeing exactly what I had seen weeks ago. No more and no less than that. The truth was surfacing on its own now, naturally. I was just not there to bury it anymore for his benefit and protection. By midweek, the messages from Nova escalated into something much bigger and more serious. "Emergency finance meeting," she wrote in all caps. "CFO looks like he wants to set the entire building on fire." She told me how Otto tried desperately to blame transition issues and knowledge gaps now that I was gone from the team entirely, but the CFO pushed back extremely hard in front of everyone. "We absolutely can't sign off on this," he said firmly to half the leadership team. "Someone approved these changes. Someone owns this complete mess." When Nova texted me that she heard my name come up in the heated meeting, my vision tunneled for a second. Maybe she mishandled the data before she left. Someone had apparently suggested to shift blame. Panic flickered through my chest briefly. Then I remembered every single comment I had left in those files. The dates, the timestamps, the emails that said clearly, "as requested by Otto Thornton." For once in my entire career, I had not just worked hard, I had documented everything with solid proof. My fear started to make room for something else entirely. I was not the one exposed here. He was. Completely and totally. On Thursday afternoon, my phone rang with an unknown number I did not recognize at all. It was HR from my old company calling me. "We're conducting a formal review related to some financial discrepancies," the woman said carefully, choosing her words. "We were hoping you could clarify the work you did before you left the organization." My pulse spiked hard, but I kept my voice completely steady and professional. I told her in simple, factual terms that I was handed a large discrepancy by my direct manager. That I identified serious issues tied to approvals outside my authority level. That I was instructed to prepare materials for a transition to the new hire, not to make final changes without proper oversight and approval. She asked if I had any documentation of my concerns along the way. I almost laughed out loud. "Yes," I said clearly. "Everything is noted in the files I left behind. and there are emails backing it all up with timestamps. When she thanked me politely, I hung up and sat very still at my desk. He had tried to nudge the blame toward me subtly, and in doing so, he just invited intense scrutiny straight back onto himself. The trap had sprung shut. That night, I got an unexpected message on LinkedIn that caught me completely off guard. It was from Willow, the woman hired to replace me. "I hope it's okay I'm reaching out like this," she wrote nervously. "I inherited something from you that doesn't make any sense at all, and I think I need to understand what really happened before you left." We set up a quick phone call that evening. She sounded completely exhausted and overwhelmed. "None of this adds up at all," she confessed quietly. "They keep asking me to just fix it, but every single trail leads back to approvals from Otto. And I found emails where you flagged issues weeks ago, and he shut you down completely." There was a long pause on the line. "He told us you left because you were overwhelmed by the workload," she added, her voice dropping lower. Anger flared hot in my chest, then cooled into something crystalline and sharp. "I wasn't overwhelmed," I said firmly. "I was done taking bullets for someone else's choices." For the first time, someone inside those walls could see what I had seen. I was not crazy. I was not overreacting to nothing. I was right all along. A week later, Nova texted me with news that made my stomach flip hard. "External auditors are here." Apparently, the CFO had pushed the issue up the chain aggressively, flat out refusing to sign off on the quarter with that kind of unexplained gap in the books. She sent me a blurry photo of strangers in dark suits standing in the lobby with briefcases. "It's serious," she wrote. "They're pulling emails, approvals, everything from the system." My chest tightened, but not with fear this time, with pure tension and anticipation. I knew exactly what they would find if they followed the trail far enough back. Rushed approvals with no backup documentation, backdated signatures that made no sense, manual overrides by one single person repeatedly. The million-dollar error was never random or accidental. It was a carefully built house of cards someone thought was invisible to everyone. I went back to my new work, trying to focus, but my mind kept drifting. I had walked away from the fire before it spread, but part of me was still watching closely to see who would get burned in the end. On Friday evening, my personal phone rang again, with Otto's name flashing on the screen. I almost let it go straight to voicemail, but curiosity won out. His voice was tight when he spoke, as if he was forcing cheerfulness through clenched teeth. "Hey," he said casually. "Heard from HR, you've been helpful with their questions. Thought we could grab coffee sometime soon, clear up any misunderstandings, make sure we're on the same page and aligned." The word, aligned, made my skin crawl with disgust. I heard exactly what he was really asking between the lines. Coordinate our stories. Take some of the weight off him. Lie if necessary to protect him from consequences. I stared out of my new office window at the city spread out beneath me like a clean slate. "I don't think that's appropriate," I said evenly, my voice calm. "But I'm sure the auditors will have everything they need in the system you built." There was a long, uncomfortable silence on his end, then a clipped, cold right, "Well, take care." When I hung up, my hands were shaking hard, but with adrenaline, not fear. For once, I was not the one scrambling desperately to appease him. He was scrambling to appease me. The power had finally shifted completely. A few days later, I received a formal email from an external law firm representing the company. They were conducting an internal investigation and would like my cooperation as a witness in the matter. They reassured me clearly that I was not under review myself. They simply needed my recollection of instructions, approvals, and timelines during my employment. My new manager was incredibly supportive, even offering to sit in on the interview if I needed backup or felt uncomfortable. When I joined the remote video call, I saw serious faces on the screen and copies of my old emails pulled up on their side already. They walked me through them methodically, one by one. Here was where I flagged the risk early on. Here was where I asked for proper guidance. Here was where I was told to just fix it, without the authority to do so correctly. Answering their careful questions felt like peeling off an old, infected bandage. It stung briefly, but underneath, there was finally healing happening. By the end of the call, one of the lawyers looked at me and said something I desperately needed to hear. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do. I ended the call and let myself finally breathe deeply. Nova called me that same night, her voice buzzing with a mix of shock and vindication. "It's so much worse than we thought," she said breathlessly. "The auditors found a clear pattern. Not just one mistake or oversight. Multiple errors over several quarters, all benefiting the same handful of vendors. And guess who approved every single change?" My stomach dropped. It was not just carelessness or bad judgment. It was actual fraud. Inflated invoices being paid without question. Kickbacks being quietly buried inside overpayments to fake companies. Performance bonuses calculated on artificially boosted numbers that were completely false. "They're saying he might have been doing this for years," Nova whispered, her voice shaking. I sat there at my kitchen table, completely stunned. I had almost destroyed myself trying to fix just the visible tip of a scheme I never even knew I was standing on top of. Now, with everything finally exposed to light, the company reached out quietly. They asked if I would be willing to do a short consulting engagement to help rebuild some of the processes that Otto had broken. This time, with pay that actually reflected my real value to them. I said yes, which brought me back to the video I started with, the one that Nova had recorded from the crack in the conference room door. In it, the board chair read from a prepared statement while Otto fidgeted nervously in his seat. They outlined the findings in cold clinical language. Misappropriated funds, manipulated approvals, serious breaches of policy and ethics. They referenced emails where concerns were raised by staff and completely ignored by management. My emails. They talked about trust, fiduciary duty, and severe consequences. I watched Otto's face crumble slowly when they said the words termination for cause and referral to authorities. He tried desperately to argue, blamed systems failures, even hinted at disgruntled former staff trying to sabotage him. But the evidence swallowed his excuses completely whole. When security appeared in the corner of the video frame, my throat tightened with emotion. Years of swallowing humiliation condensed into one sharp, electric moment of justice. He had finally, completely run out of people to hide behind. The truth had caught up with him at last. Weeks later, my life looked completely different in every possible way. I knew exactly where my work laptop was every evening. Closed, in my bag, not open on my kitchen table at midnight. My new team respected my boundaries and asked for my actual input instead of blind obedience. My manager forwarded an email from senior leadership praising the improvements I had already made in my short time there. "You're exactly what we needed," they wrote enthusiastically. On social media, I saw quiet updates from former coworkers about changes happening, more accountability, new leadership, people feeling cautiously hopeful about the future. Willow messaged me to say she had decided to stay at the company. "It looks like they're actually cleaning house properly this time," she wrote with relief. "They're replacing the right person finally." Sitting at my desk, I smiled to myself. I thought about how dangerously close I had come to sacrificing my health, my reputation, my sanity, to save a man who would have thrown me under the bus without blinking twice. I had not just escaped him. I had outgrown him completely. I had chosen myself. And that felt powerful. One Saturday morning, I ran into Otto completely by accident in a coffee shop near my apartment. He looked smaller somehow, like all the air had gone out of him overnight. No expensive suit, no entourage of people. Just a man clutching a paper cup, eyes darting away when he recognized me standing there in line. For a brief second, the old version of me wanted to shrink down, apologize for nothing, make him feel better about his situation. Instead, I stood tall and steady. "Hi," I said calmly, my voice even. He gave a tight, forced smile. "I guess you heard what happened to me." I nodded once. I did hear. There was a pause where he seemed to search desperately for a way to spin it, to rewrite the story one final time in his favor. But I was not his audience anymore. I never would be again. "I hope you're doing well," I said, and I meant it genuinely. Not for his sake, but for mine. I walked away before he could answer, my coffee warm in my hand, my spine straight. Some people think revenge is about destroying someone completely. For me, it was about one simple decision, finally refusing to set myself on fire just to keep my boss warm. And watching, from a safe distance, as his own flames caught up with him at last.